this over to our opening speaker is Deb Cruz from the Unitarian Church.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Multifaith Network for Climate Justice. We meet here, well, right now on Zoom every fourth Monday of the month. Tonight, we're going to be hearing from Seth Vidaña and Clare Fogelsong of the City of Bellingham on the city's climate action plan. So before we go there, I'd like to read the Land Acknowledgement that we have, and then an opening reading or an opening prayer, if you will. We acknowledge the land and territory of the Lummi and Nooksack peoples. Their presence is imbued in these mountains, valleys, waterways, and shorelines. May we nurture our relationship with our Coast Salish neighbors and the shared responsibilities to their homelands where we all reside today. And this is some writings from Chief Dan George. For thousands of years, I have spoken the language of the land and listened to its many voices. I took what I needed and found there was plenty for everyone. The rivers were clear and thick with life. The air was pure and gave way to the thrashing of countless wings. On land, a profusion of creatures abounded. I walked tall and proud, knowing the resourcefulness of my people, feeling the blessings of the Supreme Spirit. I lived in the brotherhood of all beings. I measured the day by the sun's journey across the sky. The passing of the year was told by the return of the salmon or the birds pairing off to nest. Between the first campfire and the last of each day, I searched for food and shelter, clothing and weapons, and always found time for prayer. The beauty of the trees, the softness of the air, the fragrance of the grass speaks to me. The summit of the mountain and the thunder of the sky, the rhythm of the sea speaks to me. The faintness of the stars, the fresh of the morning, the dewdrop on the flower speak to me. The strength of fire, the taste of salmon, the trail of the sun, and the life that never goes away, they speak to me, and my heart soars. Now, I've been asked to announce that if you have any suggestions for future presentations, to please enter those suggestions into the chat box, preferably after the presentation so that you're paying attention to our guest speakers. And then we also request that you stay muted throughout the presentation so we don't have background noise interfering. And during the discussion, then you can unmute in order to participate, but then remute to minimize your background noises again. So with that, Betsy.
Thank you so much, Deb, for starting us out with such wise words and putting us in a place where we can accept and receive, such profound truths. Thank you so much. Well, tonight, the Multi-Faith Network for Climate Justice is very pleased to be offering the wisdom and information of our two city climate action gurus, Seth Vidaña, who is the energy manager for the city of Bellingham, and Clare Fogelsong, who is the environmental resources manager for the city of Bellingham. And he also served on the climate action plan task force.
Multi-faith climate action.
I'm assuming you all can hear me. Okay. We've asked our speakers to cover a lot tonight. We're devoting an hour to their time. They're going to speak for about 40 minutes of it, and then we're going to leave 20 minutes open at the end for a question and answer period. I also noticed, and I want to appreciate the presence of our City Council member, Michael Lillyquist. So if there's some questions that Seth and Claire prefer a City Council member to answer, we have Michael here as well. Thank you so much for coming, Michael. We've asked Seth and Claire to cover the earth, and I'm just going to tell you briefly what we've asked them to cover. There was a resolution the City Council recently passed that included the 10 current recommendations that the City of Bellingham climate staff put before City Council for their adoption and incorporation into the climate action plan. These 10 recommendations, when implemented, will take the City of Bellingham a long way towards carbon zero. It's a very exciting time in the history of our city. I've also asked the two of them to share their personal stories about how they became environmentalists, how they got to where they are today, how they became climate action experts, and what it's like to do this kind of work. This is such important work. The other thing I've asked them to do is to tell us how these recommendations that the city has adopted apply, how will they apply to us as residents? We are all activists, and we want to do, what can we do to help the city and help this community move these forward? The Multifaith Network for Climate Justice's focus always is on social and climate justice. Therefore, the triple bottom line format that the task force used and now the city is using in their decision-making process, and how social justice informs the selection of these 10 recommendations is very interesting to us. So we want Seth and Claire to tell us a little bit more about that, and perhaps give us a couple of examples. When I was talking with Claire about how we're all about social justice, Claire reminded me that to become deeply resolved about climate change is the same thing as becoming deeply resolved to address climate justice. They are inseparable as issues. Let's see, what else? Some of these recommendations are also reflected in Washington State's environmental priorities in Olympia this year. And as we all know, we have a president-elect who's going to get us back in the Paris Climate Accord, and who wants to implement a broad-based climate action plan. So we've asked Seth and Claire how these state and national efforts will impact the city and how we can help climate implementation versus with our activism at the state and national efforts. So they're going to do all that in 40 minutes. Good luck. So Seth and Claire, I'm looking for you. I'm not sure which one of you is, I'm sure you two have decided which one of you is going to go first. So I'm going to turn this over to Seth and Claire.
Well, Betsy, thanks so much for the introduction there. And it's really encouraging to see so many familiar faces. I see Bob Reisenberg. Hello there, sir, from Whatcom Community College here. Steve Hansen, David Ketter. Look at all these people and folks that we have met. Peter, I have not seen Peter for a long time. Hello there. Brian, we've met. I'm going to miss some names. Michael Lillyquist and Ingrid, we've met before. And Claire, you're here too. What are you doing here? Claire and I are going to tag team this presentation here. And I think we both agreed that we don't really want to talk at you for 40 minutes. And we're here to tell you what we know. We're also really looking forward to hearing from you. And part of, I think, this effort is joining with folks in the community like yourselves who are committed to climate work and tapping into your knowledge and your wisdom as well in helping us to move forward on this incredible and challenging opportunity. So we hope to have a conversation with you. Questions are welcome here, but we certainly don't want this to be a talking at you for forever sort of thing. So we hope to hear from you.
Seth?
Does that sound right?
Yeah, it sounds good. In our 3 or 4 hour preparation for this meeting, we didn't talk about how to weave this. I was kidding, folks, about the 3 and 4 hour preparation. But we didn't talk about weaving the national and state efforts into this. Let's do that as we go through the measures, the 10 measures, and determine how state and national policy might influence those rather than having a separate discussion.
Yeah.
If that sounds good.
Well, I'll lead off here. Thanks, Claire. And Claire is my mentor here at the city of Bellingham, is really taking me under his wing and showing me the ropes. Claire's been at the city for a long time and has really built much of the foundation of the climate efforts at the city. So a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking about are really because of his work. I've been at the city for 10 months now. I was at Western Washington University for 14 years, and it's been really nice to jump in the city boat. And Claire is a big reason why we're at where we're at. But I do want to take a moment here to talk about what we're already doing. It's really tempting. I know Claire and I have felt this temptation to just dig into here are the top 10 things that we're going to do in the future and not go over what we're doing right now. And this is not attempting to say we've got it all figured out. We know that we have a long ways to go, but it's also upon us to let you know some of the things that are happening of late. And so I want to dip into that a little bit. So in concern to renewable energy, a big part of our efforts here, we have a work group with Puget Sound Energy where we're looking at how to put together a wind and solar installation for the whole city of Bellingham. We're really interested in that. We'll talk about that a little bit later within the list of our top 10 items. PSE just selected Bellingham to be one of the sites for a community solar array. It's a 930 kilowatt community array that you all will be able to subscribe to if you can't put solar panels on your house.
All right, I'm in the meeting anyway, on the phone.
Or there are other challenges. That's an opportunity for you. In the realm of energy efficiency, we've been working with City Council on a commercial energy efficiency program called CPACER. It's a loan program. And we're hopeful that this coming year, the city, through the work of the county, will have a commercial energy efficiency and renewable energy loan program for commercial entities. I've been working with the Building Association of Whatcom County and the BIA, and that's been going really well. So we've got a number of people who reached out to us, and Claire's done a great job of lining up contacts with the city, and we're getting their perspectives on building efficiency and building electrification. A few other things. I don't know if anybody here was part of Climate Week. Can you raise your hand if you were part of Climate Week this last year? Look at that interaction. Nice. Brian, I saw Brian there, and a couple other people who are on the call. So we had 23 different events. So this is, as you know, this is not a City of Bellingham thing. There's effort all over the community to make progress on this. And that's really exciting because we need everybody to move forward on this. So the list doesn't stop there. But I just wanted to say a few things that have been in progress of late, and there's a bunch more before that Claire and others have been working on. So what I'd like to do is, Betsy, is it okay to share my screen? Okay, I'm going to share my screen here, and this is not to get you into PowerPoint mode here, but I want to just show you just a few things. Can you see my slides there?
No.
Okay, great. Great, thank you. So this is part of a presentation that was given to City Council on November 9th. And one of the things that we passed on to them is basically the process that we've been through, trying to figure out how to land on the biggest bang for the buck items that we can find, right? There are so many interested parties. There are so many different ways that we can reduce our emissions at the city. It's really critical to figure out how we can get the biggest bang for the buck. If we had 100 years, it would be a different story, but we're really trying to make major progress here in the next 10. And so we've spent some good time analyzing and looking at over 145 different options that came out of our climate action plan and the climate task force report, and figuring out those which are going to give us the greatest reduction in carbon emissions over the shortest amount of time. And that process that we put together had several goals that we wanted to make sure that during our consideration of that long list of items, that we sought those items fully and fairly, and we made sure that we were allowing for public involvement along the way. And we're hoping that all of the work that we've done allows City Council to make informed choices for the city of Bellingham. So a little timeline on progress here. In January of this year, council directed staff to define a process to evaluate all of these 145 recommendations from the Climate Action Plan and the Climate Task Force report. In February, I came on board to help the city do its work on climate. We came to council in April with a fairly complex process on how to vet all these 145 items. Then we went on to vet all of them, presented to the council in June, our top 10. Those top 10 then went on to a different state where we wrote some pretty in-depth triple bottom line analyses. That those analyses look at the social, the environmental, the economic, and the technological aspects of the top 10 that we looked at. September, we brought some of those forward. In November, we brought the rest of them forward, and we're really pleased that here in November, that City Council has approved a resolution to allow us to look into those top 10 at a deeper level. So that's where we're at. That's where we're at right now. Betsy mentioned criteria. This is a slide on the types of criteria that we used for conducting our analyses. Some of the simple items, we didn't look at all of the 29 or 27 criteria that are on here. We just looked at the headers, but for the really big impact items, we looked at all of these, and we basically wrote narratives for each of the items. So in terms of the social area, equity, how would equity be impacted by this thing that we want to do? How would job development be impacted by one of the top 10 that we want to do? So we put together a fairly lengthy report and sent that on to City Council for their review. So this is sort of a light touch on how the social items are being addressed within our climate process. The work, all that work resulted in this amazing graph here, where we're looking at basically how well each of these top 10, and in this graph, it's really at the top 8 because 2 of them were already works in progress. So we shrunk that number down to 8. How did they perform in our 4 criteria areas: technical, financial, social, and greenhouse gas mitigation and environmental? And so you can see the percentages there. Basically, if something got a 25%, it got the maximum points in each of those areas. So we get not only performance in our relative criteria areas, but we also get an ordering of items to say, what's the biggest bang for the buck? According to our analysis, those items that are on the left have a higher overall score than those items that are on the right. And so our general guidance is to spend more time on those items that are further to the left. And we'll talk about each of the 8 that are on here in just a bit. So if I move past this slide, we can always go back to it. Claire, I'm going to jump into our list of 10. Anything else that you want to add in at this point? that I didn't cover. I just remembered one thing, but I'm sure you're thinking about the same thing. I'm muted telling you that you're muted. That happens all the time. You're there we go.
I said you're doing great. You didn't tell them about your childhood or your development years, but
We'll get there. That's on the list. I wanted to cover first things first, the policy stuff. Yeah.
Good.
And one I wait, did you have something, Claire?
No, I'm fine.
Okay. One item just to underline this, the top 10 that we're going to talk about, council has not given us the green light to create ordinances or regulations around these. One of the items that you'll see is electrification of new buildings. Council's merely said, please spend more time and money investigating the potential for electrification of all new buildings. They haven't said all new buildings will be electrified. That ordinance will come later on in the process should our further analysis and should our further program creation bear out that that's where we want to do. I think that's one that we are going to want to work on, but just to let you know, these top 10 don't mean that we're going to do all of these things, but they're much closer to that state than they were before. Okay, so let's go into our top 10 here. We have 5 on this page, 5 on the other, and I'm going to take the first one, efficiency requirements for owner-occupied residences. As folks that have lived in Bellingham for any amount of time know, much of our building stock is pre-1990. Some of it's pre-1950, some of it's pre-1920. And we see a lot of opportunity in going to those pre-1990 homes and having some sort of efficiency requirements for those residences potentially at point of sale, so that we can make sure that all of those residences get up to a certain level of efficiency. That does a couple things. One is it saves occupants money. Secondarily, it decreases the amount of renewable energy production that we're going to need to put into effect once we move forward in a big way on renewables. So that's number 1, efficiency requirements for owner-occupied residences. Claire, I think you're up for number 2.
Sure. Electrifying new buildings is when the task force put forward the recommendations, it was to electrify new buildings and existing buildings. We felt like electrifying new buildings was a good way to at least begin that process. It's a way to, as they say, stop digging. Don't make the hole bigger. Don't make our task of electrifying buildings sometime in the future any harder than it's going to be by continuing to build buildings that have gas and electric service. What we're envisioning here is the new buildings would just be all electric, and they would have some exemptions for some services that can't be provided yet by electricity. Those are becoming less and less as the electrical appliance and equipment industry ramps up and increases the efficiency, increases the availability, the cost is more compatible than it has been with comparing with gas appliances. So we've had encouraging discussions around this topic with the BIA and with labor. We have a long ways to go to address all of the issues that have been brought up, because there will be some potential displacement of workers that put in gas lines and maintain those. There's also the possibility and the likelihood that some of those workers would be transitioning to putting in new electrical appliances and like heat pumps, water heater, heat pumps and things like that. And that's good enough for now. No, you're next.
I think I'm next on this. Encourage statewide ban on internal combustion engines. We realize that with the number of the items that are on this list, success will be had really when we have coordination with the state and with the federal government. And I think that's probably a little bit more likely here come January than it was before. So what we're realizing is that we do need to make significant moves on transportation, because it's actually the largest, just by hair, but the largest source of emissions in the city. The number of cities and countries now, provinces, states, have said that they want to ban the sale of internal combustion engines. That's something that would be really challenging for, say, the city of Bellingham to do. But a state level would be, or work at the state level could be really useful for us. So what we're doing is intending to write a letter to the governor saying we support a statewide ban on internal combustion engines. Hopefully that will help push that item along at the state level. But we're just seeing limitations on what we can do in terms of a ban on sale of internal combustion engines. I'll move on to number 4 here, create a Bellingham Clean Energy Fund. We realize that with a number of the items on this list and outside of this list, we are limited pretty severely by dollars. There are grants out there, and we're starting to make good use of them. The city of Bellingham, especially Natural Resources, has made good use of grants for a long time. But we are seeing that our appetite for action and the account or the amount of dollars that we have to make progress are mismatched. And so what we're looking at is something like a greenways levy that could help us to fund some of the items that are on this list that would likely come at a public vote and would be something that we would need to rely on other organizations to do outreach for. That's number 4, create Bellingham Clean Energy Fund. Number 5 is one that's near the top of my list. This is working with our utility provider and other potential entities out there for the creation of a wind and or solar facility that could power all of Bellingham. We want to put as much renewable, low carbon energy on the grid as we take out in a year. That one action will likely decrease our carbon emissions by about a third, and more than that, more in the 35 to 37% arena. And it's one that I'm excited about. It's something that other towns have engaged in, a few, and it's something that PSC has done prior with the city of Bellingham, the municipal entity, Western Washington University, REI, some other businesses out there, King County, the city of Seattle. PSC built a wind and solar facility, 2 different facilities in different locations that put as much renewable energy into the grid as those entities pull out as a whole. And so what we're looking at is scaling that up to the next level. And we're starting work with PSC. There are others that might be able to help us with that as well. That's number 5. I'm just going to change slides here. Number 6 is promote electric and hybrid vehicles. I think you're up, Claire.
Yeah, that's me. I'd like to revisit electric buildings. I sort of blew by referring to the BIA, which is the Building Industry Association of Whatcom County. They're one of the entities that we've been discussing issues with, and then also the building trades, the labor organizations. And I might say also that on a national and state level, there are several communities in California and a couple back east that have put into place some version of a building electrification, new building electrification regulation, and we're sort of tracking those to see how they work out. Moving on to promote electric and hybrid vehicles, there are several measures in our existing climate action plan that direct us to purchase hybrid vehicles for city use, to put in infrastructure for hybrid vehicles, for especially the electric vehicles, and to generally support the transition to all electric or other modes of transportation. The new parts of this is to do things like support group buys, which would be we would get together with a dealer here locally, preferably, or somewhere close, that would offer a group reduced price for electric vehicles. And so, you get 20 people together or so that would want to buy an electric vehicle. The dealer cuts them a deal, gives it to them for a reduced price. And we really then substantially add to the electric vehicle market here in Bellingham. There are examples of this also in other states and nationally that we're going to be copying, trying to mimic as we work towards realization of some of these promotion activities. CPACER's you.
Great. Okay, CPACER, our support property assessed clean energy financing. I mentioned this early on in the presentation. We're making some decent headway with Whatcom County adopting a commercial property assessed clean energy and resiliency loan program. This is a type of commercial loan program for energy efficiency and renewable energy and resiliency that we see in 25 different states now. Bellingham, Washington State is actually a little later to the game than some other states. Essentially, this is a lower interest rate, longer term financing option, so we can work with our commercial entities and large multifamily buildings to get them to invest in energy efficiency and renewable energy and resiliency. And the idea is that with these investments, the savings from these investments will pay for more than, not much more, but more than the loan cost. And so we're really hoping that these commercial entities and large firm multifamily buildings will be interested in moving on this, because it'll mean somewhat of a positive cash flow in their situation, and we get out of it efficiency, which is connected to our need to create less infrastructure in terms of renewable energy, wind and solar down the way. So we're working with county council on that, and that's moving pretty well at this point. So I'm hoping in the next year that Whatcom County will adopt a CPACER program that will allow the city of Bellingham and all the other cities to be involved in that program. And Claire, I think you're on the last two there.
Yeah. The city carbon fund was sort of the reverse of the fund that was mentioned earlier, in as much as we have quite a bit of forest property out in Lake Whatcom watershed, and we have urban forest property that grow trees. Trees sequester carbon. We looked into several years ago, looked into how we might be able to monetize that growth. There are markets out there that trade in renewable energy credits in carbon sequestration credits. So they pay people to grow trees and to not harvest them, and you get a credit attached to that sequestration amount, and you're able to sell those out on the market for people that are wanting to offset their emissions. Our situation doesn't really qualify us for that kind of a process, for that kind of market right now, because we buy the trees, the land, the property out in the Lake Whatcom watershed to protect the forests, and so there's no additionality. There's no we're not going to harvest them, so we're not sequestering carbon that would at some time be harvested. A little more complicated. I'm not being very articulate about this, but the reality of it is we're keeping a close eye on the markets. There's a lot of volatility, a lot of change in the carbon markets. And at some point in the future, we might be able to create a sequestration program with the properties and the trees that we own, and be able to gain some funding for other projects out of that sequestration amount. High density development and increased density in transition residential multifamily. These are two items that the task force put forward. They are quite they're quite there's quite a degree of agreement between these and what the city's planning department was already doing. The gist of it is that our urban centers aren't being utilized in the way that they were initially conceptualized. They're being underdeveloped as far as density goes, and the same with the zoning that occurs between urban villages, urban densities, and the residential neighborhoods. There's a need to have a transition between the dense neighborhoods and the single family residence neighborhoods. And those also have been, rather than multifamily going into that, or multi-unit going into that, or neighborhood commercial going into those zones, there's been a lot of development of those zones in single family residences. So there's not that transitioning happening. So the planning department's working on this, and they'll continue to develop these two projects. One of the, what was that against, Betsy, urban villages? Betsy just chatted me here. An urban village, urban village is a zone that has been designated so that we would increase in densities in certain parts of the city. And I think there are 7 of them around the city. A good example is over here in the Fountain District. There's an urban village that is being, that is seeing some growth in the ways that it was envisioned for urban villages. Is that good enough, Betsy? I can't see you, so a thumb isn't going to work. So, and I'll carry on here. So like I said, the planning department is working on these. I don't know how much they'll be getting to these next year. They have their hands full responding to our housing issue here as it's becoming acute. But they do, I know, have plans to continue to work on these. So with that, those are the 10 items. And to just clear the decks so that we're keeping up with Betsy's expectations for the agenda, I'll give you the 1-minute version of how I got where I'm at. I started doing environmental activism back in the late 70s, became an organizer for the Green Party and bioregional activism here in the 80s. Started working in the environmental field in the mid 80s and continued to do that in wetlands and restoration work until I was hired by the city in 1999 following the fire that occurred in Whatcom Creek. And I was put in charge of the restoration of that and then transitioned to other issues. The city started looking at climate issues associated with glacial retreat back in the early 2000s, 2002. Started going to climate conferences, tracking the climate models to see if they were making predictions that were going to affect the city, and indeed they were. So we adjusted some of our water management strategies to take into account the eventual retreat of the glaciers that that are in the middle fork of the Nooksack River that we somewhat depend on. And during that time also, I was, I don't know if you recall, Governor Gregoire's efforts to do climate planning. And she appointed some committees to give her information on several climate issues. One of them was sea level rise, and I happened to be on that for a while and helped with the report. And since then, I've just been preparing for Seth to get hired. That's it.
Preparing for Seth to get hired. I hope I am not disappointed just yet. Thank you, Claire. For the personal story, how did I get involved? I get this question asked a lot, and I want to have this sort of like movie sort of like the moment where you realized, where you had to do something, and it just didn't really happen that way. I was lucky enough to have my parents take me into natural places. I think that was one component. I was also an activist student activist here in Bellingham and some other places. Worked on environmental issues, social justice issues. It's always been really exciting to me. I went to Western Washington University as an undergraduate, and I'd say I probably majored in student activism and minored in the rest of the stuff I was supposed to do there. And I found that really exciting to be there as a student activist. And I taught at an alternative high school for 4 years. I was a janitor for a little bit, and wanted to come back and get a master's degree. But I wanted that to result in doing some of the exciting work that I'd done before, some of that organizing work on issues of justice and of the environment. And so I came back to Western Washington University, had a meeting with the VP, and told him I wanted to organize a sustainability program for the university. He gave me a year's worth of funding and told me to roll up my sleeves. And I was there for 14 years and built a big office. There we had, I think, 20 people, including a lot of student employees by the time I left. In the past, 3 or 4 years, I started feeling like the climate issues were becoming more and more prominent in my life. I wanted to get closer to that work. And it felt like education is a great way, to get more leaders out in the field. But I wanted to be a little closer to the action, and had been feeling that way for a bit. And this job came up and I applied and obviously got in. So that's kind of my story, how I got to this spot. There's a little bit of a personal note with climate change. My parents are both immigrants. My dad's from Cuba, and a lot of our history resides in Havana. And that is a city that is poised to have to be erased through climate change, because much of the city is at sea level. And so we are, there's a personal piece for me with that item, some family history there. So I'm motivated by that. And I have 2 kids too, so that's a huge motivation in my world as well. So that's a little bit on the personal piece there. Yeah, Betsy, how was that? Was that enough? Was that enough story for you?
Thank you very much to both of you. I mean, we could want a lot more, but I appreciate that. Very interesting. You both came by it really honestly through your own work and your own experiences.
Beth, maybe you could take down your screen.
Oh,
Yeah.
you got that. Yep. There we go. Okay.
There was one other item, and that was how these 10 recommendations, if implemented, I guess we're all wondering what we can do. And as you were going through these 10 recommendations, I was thinking, gee, I ought to buy an electric car, and gee, I ought to put some solar panels on my roof, and I don't know. So I'm wondering if you two could speak to ways the activist community could help support these recommendations.
Seth, I'll start this. We talked about this. We talked about what we could do and what we could advise, and you all are. I know a lot of you are already involved in activism on this issue. So telling you that changing light bulbs and taking buses is good probably is a little bit old news for you. So I don't know if you're comfortable with this, but other than being political activists and staying tuned to the issues, what are you ready to do? What do you want to do? What do you think you could do? I'm thinking that we have an expertise in a lot of issues, but you all know each other and you all know what you're capable of doing. And we're certainly willing to continue the discussion, be part of it, but we'd like to hear from you, I think.
Okay, that's a challenge for us all. And at this point, I'm going to ask for people to raise their hand. We will start taking questions. David Ketter, I see you've got your hand up. And if you could also, as Deb suggested at the beginning of this meeting, stay muted unless you're asking a question.
Great. Well, first of all, a big thanks to Seth and Claire for being here tonight. I appreciate the information. And one thing that, to answer Claire's question, to give a little bit of an input, is I'm about to attend, and so is Steve, and so is Karen, a meeting on Wednesday that's being convened by people from Stand Earth to create some form of coalition or explore the potential of forming a coalition of groups and individuals to support the city and moving forward. So that's something that we, this is the first that most people are hearing about this in here. It's very, very, very new. So we haven't decided to do that, but that's something that we could do. Now, what would come out of that is, actions and campaigns to potentially win more public support from for the efforts of the city and the city council. And so there's a possibility. But if I could ask a clarifying question, I think you addressed this somewhat before, but to get for sure, were the 10 action items that came out of the second tier process, I'm not super clear on that process. Does it choose the 10 that are next easiest to do, or that are the most bang for the buck, so to speak, or the biggest impact?
A lot of their, the common feature of those 10 is that they do have a significant reduction of carbon emissions if fully implemented. So they weren't chosen as the easiest to do. If we would have went that route, we would have promoted light bulb changes and taking the bus and things like that. But these are ones, I think the city felt, that the council felt, the administration felt like it's the time for us to ramp it up. The task force certainly pointed us in that direction with the measures they brought forward. We had also brought forward a 2018 revision to our climate action plan. We didn't have that kind of vision in that action plan that the task force brought forward. It's just becoming an acute issue that it's time to take a whack at some of the big problems.
Okay.
Claire, you might want to mention how much of our carbon emissions come from buildings and cars, which is why those two items are on your top 10.
Oh, they make up the majority of the emissions, a good 2/3. So yeah, Seth was right. If we don't do anything about vehicles, then we don't really move the dial very often or very much. And for those of you that attended the task force meetings and heard Rick Nichols, oh gosh, talk about it, he said, we can do all these other things. We can put in the infrastructure, and we can promote buses, we can do this and that. But unless we eliminate the use of internal combustion engines, we're not going to move the dial on the transportation reductions. It's just not going to happen. And he had the models that were developed through the task force process that showed that without that step, transportation just continues to be one of the biggest factors that we have.
Thank you.
Thanks. Just a quick
also-
follow-up, Betsy. I forgot to mention that Ingrid, who's convening that meeting on Wednesday, is on this call. So thank you, Ingrid, for posting in the chat. She shared her email address, and if anybody wants to join the meeting, you can grab her address.
Actually, yes, Ingrid, I was going to ask you if you wanted to speak up. Ingrid is here from Stand Earth, the organization David referred to.
Yeah, thank you, Betsy. Yeah, I mean, Dave covered all of it, but we've been really focusing on the specific recommendation for new building electrification. So it's really good to hear all these updates. But we'll just be talking about the community effort to work with the city to get an ordinance passed, hopefully as early next year as possible. So that's it, and everyone is welcome to join. I put my email in the chat, so if you want me to send over Zoom information for the call on Wednesday, it's at 5 o'clock, and I'm happy to share with anybody who's interested in joining.
Thank
And
you.
when we start reaching out to other community organizations, would you be a good contact for Stand Earth?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Thanks, Claire.
And Michael Lilyquist, you put something in the chat function about another resource. Is there something more you'd like to say about it?
Well, I do remember about a year ago, there was an informal group that met several times to figure out ways of basically creating a groundswell of public support for climate change actions that pushed in the same direction as the Climate Action Task Force of the city. And of course, the task force delivered their report in November, and that's when we were doing a lot of meetings, and then it kind of fell apart. So I think Reese is involved in like climate neutral Bellingham or carbon neutral Bellingham or some group like that. Just want to know, I don't know, David, if and Ingrid, if you know Reese Faller in town, he had, you know, we had a meeting of up to 15 people, and it sounds like you're trying to do something similar. The city can't just be seen to be acting from the top down. It has to be seen to also responding to community concerns. And so my message to them is, don't treat it like you need to convince the city. Treat it more like you need to convince the community that the city is acting on our behalf together. I think that's just a more positive way of creating the messaging. So, you know what I'm saying?
Yes, thank you.
Are there other hands? I see Bob. Bob, do you have a question? And then after Bob, Karen.
Couple things. Talking about cars and emissions, when we did a greenhouse gas emission study at Watkins Community College 5-6 years ago, we found that the #1 source of greenhouse gas emissions that we were involved in was students driving to the campus. That was over 80%. Everything we could do on campus would not put a dent in our greenhouse gas emissions unless we get students to not drive to campus. So that was one interesting thing. I suspect Seth remembers that. And Seth also, he didn't really sing all his praises about education. He helped found the Washington Higher Education Sustainability Consortium that drew Washington State colleges across the state, and then eventually Oregon, into an organization that focused on sustainability, got a lot of students involved on campuses across both states. So education is not sufficient to get the job done, but it sure is a helpful component.
Yeah, thanks for that, Bob. Appreciate that.
Karen, and then Linda.
I am thrilled to see the city pursuing PACE funding and understand that it needs to start somewhere. You're starting with commercial buildings and also multifamily dwellings. I think I heard you say, is there any discussion about making that available to the average resident going forward?
The CPACER legislation is not focused on single family residential. I was waiting for that as well. I think that's a great idea. It's a little bit more challenging with single family, given the history of that program in other states. There's been some minor cases of predatory lending that have followed that idea. And I think that folks here will have to work through that, not only the program creation for single family residential, but also some of the expectations about what that program has been in other states. So I'm hoping that will be in the next few years folks will move in that direction. But thus far, it's been commercial and large multifamily.
And just in case it wasn't clear, it's the CPACER legislation. It's a state package. It's a state rule. And what it does is allows the counties, it gives them permission to adopt the CPACER program if they want to.
Mhm. I had heard that the legislation had passed. My own view is that helping us all move forward as a community will be a combination, ideally, of requirements plus also incentives and rebates. And that's why PACE funding, I think, plays such a critical role. And I wondered if you thought also that the Multifaith Network might play a role in helping you shape or promote this Greenways levy. Again, I think low and moderate income families are going to need assistance. And even the average resident who has to address these energy efficiency requirements when they sell their home, I mean, it will be hugely meaningful if rebates and incentives are available.
Karen, I think that's, oh, sorry, go ahead, Claire.
Well, I was going to say, actually, Seth and I were hoping that when he was talking about the funding mechanism, that one of you would just endow the first, how much, $1 million or something and get it going.
Sure.
Well, and on that note, it's a little, I mentioned this to Betsy before the call, is that it's a little challenging to talk about all of this because of the hats that we wear, right? I'm here as the climate and energy manager, serve everyone at the city of Bellingham. And so it's some of the questions are great questions for community organizers, for electeds like Michael, who has his hand up. Those are great questions for those folks there. And I don't mean to walk so softly, but I'll say this, at some point, hopefully we will have a ballot initiative that will be directed at funding a number of things, including renewable energy for the city of Bellingham, right? There will be work that will need to get done outside of the city. Who takes that on, how they take that on is really up to you all. But undoubtedly there's going to be work that needs to be done outside of the purview of Claire and myself and the other staff at the city. I know that's a really shaky answer, but I hope that it makes sense. And Michael, I think Michael's got a response to that there.
I'm sorry that I blurred that line. I think that as residents, we have as much responsibility as the city of Bellingham.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes. Michael, you wanted to respond to that? And, I'm also mindful of the time. Linda has a question, and so does Jim Troutman. And then we've got a bunch of questions in the chat function. So we're going to be mindful of that as well. Michael?
I'll try to be quick. Karen, I think it was appropriate to blur that line because that line is already there and it's already blurry. And Seth was very appropriate in his comments. He has to live on one side of that line. I don't. I go all the way across the line. I can disagree with the city. I can disagree with the entire council and the mayor if I wanted to. So, I mean, elected officials have a little bit more freedom to speak our mind. And I would like to say that Seth pointed to something pretty important too, which is that a lot of this work is going to be outside the city. We will need the UTC, the regulators. We will need the Olympia legislature. We need Whatcom County to move forward on the CPACER program, for example, or wait for them to default and then the city can step in only afterwards. So there's a lot of advocating that I would like the city to be doing, not as a way of saying it's not our responsibility, but as a way of saying half of our work lies outside of the city's control. And so half of our work maybe is lobbying and advocating. And the other half is the hard work that Seth and Claire are doing, writing ordinances and exploring funding mechanisms. I won't say any more because we have other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Linda, and then Jim.
What I would like to ask really of Michael, Seth, and Claire, given that you're talking to the Multifaith Network, and talk about divides. And at least in my limited experience, the divide is somehow faith and spirituality were over here, and then the nitty-gritty work of city council and meetings that have to do with environmental stuff are over there. And kind of a fire inside of me is that I don't feel like all my studies in theology have taught me how to answer is how to on the ground bring that together, that not only is there not a divide between our accountability to the earth and our faith accountability, but it's an absolute crucial combination at this moment in time. So I would just appreciate if you had like, 10 points, maybe even just 3 tips for helping us who are connected with people of faith, or just helping us with people who care about creation and want to merge the separation or the sense of separation that the county will take care of things. That's their job. Or excuse me, not the county, the city, the elected officials will take care of that. And I'll just wait for them, somebody else to do something.
Since I'm a presenter, I want to go ahead of Michael just for a second. That's an issue that we're struggling with, because we come into this with the charge of reducing carbon emissions. But we know that some of the things that are being proposed are going to have a profound effect if they're not proposed gently and with sensitivity. They're going to have a profound effect on those vulnerable populations in the city. We have to work as hard as we can to make sure there's equity in how we implement these actions.
If
Michael?
I really suggest you go online and look at work on messaging for climate change. It really is value-centered, community-centered. It has as many conservative touchstones as it does progressive touchstones. If you speak in that value-oriented language and start where people agree, you can usually make a lot more progress than if you start talking facts and figures and policies and programs.
Thank you. Jim, you've been waiting patiently to ask a question.
Yes, thanks, Betsy. I was curious where maybe the school district comes into play with things too. There's obviously a lot of buses and transportation in that area. There is energy needs at the school level. Has the city integrated or talked? Does anybody really know what's maybe happening at the superintendent's level with sustainability in terms of electrification of buildings, of solar, of transportation? Thank you.
Seth, do you have any lead on this?
Yeah, not a ton there, Jim. It's a great question. I do know just a couple small tidbits. There's a new school that's that the district is building that I think was originally planned to use a gas-fired boiler. Now they're going all electric, and my read is that that's partly due to the work of local climate-focused nonprofits in the city in providing resources and asking questions. So that's one item. It feels like to me that standard of an all-electric building is becoming more and more prominent within the school district, given their funding and that they don't have a whole lot of it. One of the challenges is making sure that that they're getting the best bang for the buck. So the cheapest, easiest, most reliable thing right now is to buy and use a natural gas boiler that'll probably last 50 years. going in and saying, hey, we want you to use this quote unquote new technology. It's not new in many parts of the world. Heat pump technology is more challenging. They feel like they're taking a risk with that, and they have to really meter out those dollars, those few dollars that they have. And so getting them to take a risk on this could mean 5 years down the road, having a major expense that now reduces the amount of dollars that they have for other things. So throughout this whole conversation here and at the city for the past 10 months has really been trying to balance our ambition for nationally leading climate work and keeping Bellingham an affordable place to live and being equitable in what we do. And so what we really are looking into is how do we achieve our climate goals and not make Bellingham a more expensive place to live? How do we, or a much more expensive place to live? How do we do that? And how do we get, how do we, you know, when we're thinking about these initiatives, how do we get a boost in equity, a boost in health from the things that we're choosing? So early on, someone asked a question about, I think that was David, you know, these 10 that you've chosen, are these the items that, you know, give the biggest bang for the buck? Are they the easiest thing? And I'll say it again, these were the items that gave us the greatest, we project, will give us the greatest reduction in carbon emissions over the shortest amount of time and maximize community benefit. That was the other piece, is they had to maximize community benefit. And so there were a few things there that were great on the carbon emissions end, but in terms of equity and some other items were not as clear. So we're trying to balance all of that at the same time. So it's a roundabout way of answering your question. I think Bellingham School District is working on this. We've sent them information on some grant programs for electric school buses. I would love to see a whole fleet of electric school buses. That's a major financial undertaking, and that's going to take some money from the state, and it's going to take some money from the federal government to get to that level. Can we pilot, you know, 1 or 2 electric buses right now? I think that's within our means. I don't work at the school district, but I would love to see even that step. And I'll say that the superintendent there and a number of the staff have been reaching out to me and Claire for resources. And so I think that they're really focused in on this. They've done a bunch of work in the area of local food. So I think they're really interested in sustainability, and hopefully we'll be making even more moves here in the future.
Thank you, Seth. In the last few minutes that we have of your time and attention, Julie, I see there are a bunch of people who've posted questions in the chat function. Would you like to pitch us a few?
Yes, actually, there are really only 2 that haven't been asked. And one is, have any target dates been established for the top 10 priorities?
Could you repeat that, Julie, please?
Have you kind of set any target dates for your top 10 priorities?
That's what I thought you said. Seth, I see you're still muted, so thanks for that. There's such a diversity in those 10, and they're going to have different pathways to implementation. And we have to develop the programs, the implementation programs, take them to council, see if the council agrees with those programs, and then implement. We have like the banning of ICE vehicles, for instance. There's no way for us to predict when that might happen, because it's a state action that we've determined would preclude any local action. We're going to be working hard next year on 2021 to get some of these through that program development phase and into an implementation phase. I can't tell you how many we'll get through, but I'm sure we'll get a couple of them through by the end of next year. So that's as best I can do, Julie. I'm waffling. We don't have a set schedule.
Okay, thank you. Okay, here's one more. So in your efforts to be equitable, are you talking to representatives from social justice groups in the way that you are talking with labor and industry for input?
Yeah, Claire and I just had this conversation. I think that was last week or the week before about that exact thing. That I think through Claire's contacts, we've done a great job. I should say we've been successful in connecting with labor, less so thus far on the social justice end. So one thing that you could help us out with is identification of those groups. Some I know from my work at Western, others would be great to get, and you can even throw it in the chat bar here, groups that you think we could reach out to. That would be really helpful.
And one of the reasons why we're a little bit, well, we don't have a whole lot of time to reach out. And so we've been reaching out to a couple of groups just in the last month. But one of the things that Seth and I have talked about recently is that the groups we've reached out to so far have very distinct, very focused issues on the building side of the equation. The social justice groups, we're assuming, will have issues that will span at least most, if not all, of the 10 measures. So when we reach out to them, we want to be prepared to present well, and to take the comments and the suggestions that they have as a total package, rather than what we're doing right now, which is really focused.
And someone put in the chat, Julie did Greg Winter with the Opportunity Council, or maybe that's Greg Winter and the Opportunity Council. Opportunity Council will be part of the conversations with efficiency requirements, undoubtedly.
Yeah, and they've actually they were included initially when we were going through the initial feasibility assessment. We were trying to get information from them about how many crews would be needed, what the cost would be, what the training requirements would be, things, how many they could do in a year, things like that. So we'll continue to have conversations with them.
I mean, on housing, I think he is the person in the community who is an expert about housing and housing needs, and for vulnerable people. I mean, it's his background before he became executive director of Opportunity Council.
Right. Well, we have talked with Habitat for Humanity representative and Council on Aging representative so far.
That's good. Well, our time, unfortunately, has come to an end. I feel like we have 10 more hours worth of questions for you. There's been a request for your slides, the ones that you were showing us. And so we're hoping that, Seth, where are you? You're the one that was showing them. Would you like to email them to me and I can get them out?
I'll send those to you, Betsy, for sure.
Okay. And again, in the chat function, if you want to check out the email address for Ingrid's Zoom meeting on, what is it, Wednesday? That's a way to participate and to support the city's efforts, that's for sure. Any other last minute requests or comments before we end this portion of our meeting?
I'll mention, oh, go ahead. I think someone else had a comment.
No, I was just thanking the presenters. It's wonderful to see this progress.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Karen, and thank you, Betsy, and everyone for being here. This is an all hands on deck situation.
Yeah. And you guys are the ones to do it. I mean, we're so impressed with your commitment and your good hearts and your obviously competent skills. You know, you've put Bellingham on the map. We're so proud.
Okay.
Well, this, go for it, Claire.
It's a, you know, we're the tip of the iceberg. We have lots of staff that are working with us, or a couple of them at least. So yeah. I
know it's a joint effort. The task force, the city council, the city staff, and I don't know.
And Betsy, if I can, Bellingham put Bellingham on the map, right? Yeah. Bellingham put Bellingham on the map. And it takes all of us in this all hands on deck situation to make this work.
That's right.
And we have the work that we do in the city. There's work that's done in all of these circles. And you know, I think Claire's comments on changing out light bulbs and, you know, buying an EV are spot on. We need, from my humble perspective, system change, and people have been calling for that for a long time, on the climate front and on other fronts too. There is work that has to be done outside of the city. And I think the feeling sometimes that Claire and I have experienced is, you know, we're, you know, 2 or 3 people in a room, and we have 100 people looking in this room asking us, you know, when we're going to be done, when, you know, what's the timeline, when is this thing going to be complete? And my hope is that those 100 folks outside the room can begin to, and continue to, because this has been going on for a long time, continue to organize and continue to do the work that's right for those groups that are on the outside. The key is communication and making sure that the city and those groups outside and elected officials are in communication about what's going on. I worked up at Western, it's a microcosm of you know, the city situation, but things broke down most often when there was a lack of communication. Student group wants to get something done, and they push something for 4 or 5 months, and the folks in another sector of the university have no idea that it's going on. And so having a regular, you know, dispatches of information, a place for people to talk, where we can come together, not as, you know, city and community group and whatever, but as a group of people who are trying to figure out how to make this thing work. That, I think, will be key. And convening that group, I think, will be essential for making sure that our efforts are as efficient as possible, because time is of the essence and we got to get moving. So I know the city will be a part of that conversation, and we hope that you will be too.
Well, yeah, you speak so eloquently about the need to come together as one, and that's what the Multifaith Network for Climate Justice is all about. Our goal is to speak as one on behalf of this beautiful earth that we have an obligation to protect. And we're, you know, you can count on us as your loyal advocates and supports. So with that in mind, we thank you very much for your presentation. You're welcome to stay for the last few minutes of our meeting. That's fine with us, but we're going to end this portion of the meeting for now.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
And we do have a few announcements and then our closing prayer or meditation. But I just want to say that really, I mean, the time is come where the world is turning our way. And the Multifaith Network for Climate Justice has been incubating during this COVID year. And we have work to do. You, I'm sure, have heard what the calling is. We need to reach out to our own communities. And if any of you that are not on our leadership team are interested in joining with that effort, we sincerely want and desire your time and attention. Please let us know, either Julie or me. With that in mind, we do have a couple of announcements. I'm going to turn this over to Julie.
Should I turn off the recording?
Yeah.
I guess so, yeah. Not as interesting as they are, although I think we're.
So I just have a little update on our leadership team, which has been meeting monthly